In 1971, two men walked out of the company building they had built themselves. One was 53, the other 58. They walked away from a company that stood alongside Pioneer and Sansui as one of Japan's big three in audio. A company whose shares were listed in the first section of the Tokyo Stock Exchange. A company bearing the very name they had invented. In Japan at that time, a man over 50 did not start over. He worked until being appointed an honorary advisor, received a commemorative watch, and retired to tend bonsai. Instead, these two men went to a bank to ask for a loan to start a new business. The bank approved the loan immediately, without discussion, because the younger brother's reputation was worth more than any collateral. They raised the rest by selling their own stake in the very company they had just left. 30 years later, the corporation they had left behind would announce negative shareholders' equity and survive only by writing off debt amounting to 25 billion yen. Meanwhile, the small workshop the two brothers had assembled in a private home on the outskirts of Tokyo had, by then, gone 20 years without a single loan. How did a company of just 80 employees outlive the industry giants? Why did its greatest technological breakthrough arrive in exactly the same year its former employer began to collapse? And why does a company capable of selling 3 times as much deliberately limit production to just 25 units a day? You'll find out very soon. The story begins in the mountains of Nagano Prefecture in the town of Komagane, where the Kasuga family relocated in the devastated year of 1946. The elder brother, Nakaichi, the younger brother, Jiro, and their uncle, Hisao, founded Kasuga Musen Denki Co. Limited, a workshop specializing in radio components. A year later, the business needed a trademark, and the name emerged from simple arithmetic. 3 founders working together in harmony, like a musical trio. Thus, the Trio brand was born. By 1960, it had become the company's official name, and a year later, when the company went public, it needed a name for export, one that sounded appealing and was easy for Americans to pronounce. They came up with Kenwood. Jiro Kasuga was an engineer to the core. In 1957, his team developed Japan's first FM tuner. In 1962, Japan's first transistorized integrated amplifier. He didn't merely oversee development, he was a passionate listener himself. The kind of person who could spend hours in front of a pair of speakers playing the same record. Nakaichi was responsible for sales, while their brother-in-law, Hideo Nakano, served as president. The family business grew so rapidly that by the end of the 1960s, its shares were trading in the first section of the stock exchange. Ironically, it was this very success that broke everything. Once a company goes public, it no longer truly belongs to its founders. Bank representatives take seats on the board of directors, and banks operate to a simple, indubitable logic. The market is enormous. You have to win through volume. And the market really was enormous. Japan's baby boom generation, 8.1 million people born between 1947 and 1949, was reaching the age when receiving a stereo system upon entering high school was almost a rite of passage. Every spring in March and April, systems from the Big Three flew off the shelves. The rational strategy was obvious. More inexpensive models, more entry-level receivers, more turnover. Jiro looked at those plans and felt a heaviness inside himself that he would later describe with remarkable simplicity. This is not the path I want to spend my life following. The paradox was that he wasn't leaving a bad strategy. He was leaving the right one. The banks were right. Trio made enormous profits in the mass market. But within that correctness, there was no longer room for equipment built not to be sold, but to be heard. On June 1, 1972, a new company was born. They debated the name at length. One proposal, seriously considered, was Giro Electronics, after the younger brother. Instead, they settled on Kensonic Laboratory. Ken came from Kenwood, the export brand they had left behind. Here lies a detail that most fans of the brand still don't know. Kenwood didn't simply let the founders go. It invested in the new company and remained a shareholder until the mid-1990s. For the first year, Jiro's house in Tokyo's Oda Ward served as the company's office. They started with just over 10 people, executives and design engineers, but within a few months, the staff had grown to 65, as those who shared the brothers' vision followed them. Additional engineers came from Marantz and Luxman. For an entire year, this team worked without releasing a single product, not one piece of equipment, not one sale, only blueprints, prototypes, and endless debates about sound. The product name came from two words: accu, from accurate, phase, a parameter that in the 1970s almost no one took seriously. Accuphase. Japanese audiophiles stumbled over the name and unanimously concluded it must be a foreign brand. For years, people assumed the company was European or American, and their founders made no effort to correct them. In June 1973, the company moved from Jiro's house into a new building in Aoba Ward, Yokohama. Accuphase remains there to this day. Then in August, the company finally introduced its first three products: the P300 power amplifier, the C200 preamplifier, and shortly after, the T100 FM/AM tuner. That autumn, the P300 won the gold medal at the Japan Compo Grand Prix. The price, however, was beyond outrageous. The three-component system cost as much as a car, and compared with the affordable receivers offered by the Big Three, it seemed almost provocative. Yet the market reacted very differently from what the skeptics had expected. The units sold out rapidly, reviews were ecstatic, and in America, the new brand was dubbed the Rolls-Royce of amplifiers. It turned out that customers willing to pay several times more for superior quality did exist. In May 1974, the trio was joined by a component that collectors today call the founding document of the brand, the E202 integrated amplifier. Everything that had previously lived in three separate chassis was brought together into one: 100 watts per channel into 8 ohms, a parallel push-pull output stage using high-power transistors, two enormous 20,000 microfarad filter capacitors, two analog power meters on the front panel, and an internal layout whose craftsmanship matched the elegance of the exterior. Then came what truly made Accuphase an anomaly. While the rest of the industry lived by the calendar of annual model changes, the company adopted an internal code of principles that it published openly and never changed. Do not expand, do not radically change the design, build products that last, design them so they are easy to repair, and therefore beautiful inside. Quality instead of quantity. Keep capital inside the company. But in the early 1980s, the market began to change. In the fall of 1982, the compact disc was introduced. The industry surged ahead so quickly that within a couple of years, every major brand had a CD player in their lineup: Sony, Denon, Marantz, and even their former colleagues at Kenwood. Accuphase remained silent. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3. Engineers in Yokohama listened to the first production CD players and failed to find in them the very reason they had devoted themselves to audio engineering. For 4 years, the company released no digital source component at all, losing market share in the hottest segment of the decade. The answer arrived in July 1986, and it looked like heresy. Instead of releasing a single player, Accuphase introduced two separate components, the DP80 transport and the DC81 digital processor. The idea of separating the transport mechanism and the digital conversion into different chassis seemed eccentric at the time. Why pay twice for what everyone else fit into one box? The DP80 mechanism was mounted on a ceramic base with a special resin and suspended to prevent vibration from affecting the reading process. The entire system was clocked from a single master oscillator. The improved DP80L and DC81L pair sold in the United States for $13,000. In 1987, the M1000 monoblock amplifier appeared, using MOSFETs in a non-switching Class A operating mode, a machine that set the standard for Japan's entire high-end audio elite. Then, Japan's economic bubble burst. Sansui, the third member of the famous Big Three, fell out of the race. Luxman began changing hands. Nakamichi moved toward bankruptcy. Demand for expensive components declined. The baby boomer generation stopped buying stereo systems, and low-cost Asian manufacturers took over the mass market. By the mid-1990s, Kenwood had divested its stake in the former Kensonic, leaving Accuphase completely independent. The climax came in 2002. At the end of the fiscal year ending in March, Kenwood Corporation, the company founded by the Kasuga brothers in the mountains of Nagano and left behind them 30 years earlier, reported negative shareholders' equity. That same year, in Yokohama, the C2800 preamplifier was introduced. Inside was a technology that had been developed for years and named AAVA, Accuphase Analog Varigain Amplifier. It was a volume control without a variable resistor. The music signal was converted into 16 weighted current sources, each switched on or off independently, while the volume knob itself was merely read by a sensor that told the processor which combination to assemble. 65,536 possible combinations. In 2002, Accuphase also demonstrated the other side of its engineering, not subtle control, but brute force. The M8000 monoblock became the new flagship and remained at the top of the lineup for 6 years, with no direct replacement even after it was discontinued. 250 watts into 8 ohms, but as soon as the load impedance was cut in half, the power doubled accordingly to 500 watts into 4 ohms, 1,000 into 2, and 2,000 watts into 1 ohm. At that time, Accuphase's financial position looked almost indecently healthy for an audio company. No loans for more than 20 consecutive years, a capital adequacy ratio above 85%, no outside shareholders, and therefore no one demanding quarterly growth. On January 11, 2007, Jiro Kasuga passed away at the age of 89. His memorial service was held at a hotel in Shin, Yokohama, and at his own request, Gabriel Faré's Elegy was played. A year and a half later, Kenwood merged with JVC. Both companies entered the merger burdened with losses, making it a defensive move rather than a triumphant one. The brand, created by the Kasuga brothers for export, now survives as a trademark within JVC Kenwood. The workshop in Aoba Ward still operates according to the same principles. The staff numbers around 80 people, the same as at the company's founding. About 25 are design engineers, 17 work on the assembly line, 7 are employed in the service department repairing equipment built 40 years ago, and 3 are dedicated solely to quality control. Production is about 25 units per day, roughly 5,000 per year, and the assembly line does not move at a fixed pace. Each unit stays at its station exactly as long as necessary. Before shipment, every product operates under load for 24 hours, undergoes vibration testing, and receives an individual production history card that makes it possible to trace any future warranty claim back to a specific assembly operation. Products are shipped to 60 countries, but only through carefully hand-selected dealers. To celebrate its 50th anniversary, the brand released a series that took 4 years to complete. the E800 integrated amplifier in 2019, the C3900 preamplifier in 2020, the DP1000 and DC1000 pair in 2021, and in 2022, the E5000 integrated amplifier and the A300 monoblock. In 2024, Stereophile named it Amplification Component of the Year, ahead of finalists from the United States and Britain. Have you ever owned any Accuphase equipment? Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.